Welcome back to another edition of Crush Your Cravings Class, and where we're talking everything cravings, everything food and sugar addiction, and emotional eating. And so we are so blessed to have Dr. Zalazar. I did not.
Zaldivar, it's okay. Everybody ruins it. You're not the only one. It's so funny. My maiden name, when I changed it to this is my married name. I'm
Yeah.
thinking, oh, this is great. I love my married name. I was like, I want to change it. And because I thought in my head it was going to be easier, and it turns out to be the complete opposite. Nobody gets it. Nobody.
Zaldivar.
Zaldivar, yes.
Okay, I got it now.
It's fine.
So welcome, welcome, welcome. So, I really, really love this topic today because we always talk about the pleasure sensors of dopamine and what happens to our brains when we are having fun or we're um, eating something that we like, or the association of having fun and eating something that we like, and how we're socialized and that sort of thing. And no one has really broken it down the way that we're going to hear today. And so, welcome, 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 Dr. Sarah.
That's better.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm super excited to delve deeper into basically, this was the topic of my dissertation, right? This is what I spent 6 years of my education doing my PhD at the University of Miami, focused on how do we treat the root cause of addiction? How
Mhm.
do we treat the root cause of cravings? Not just cravings, by the way. This protocol that we're going to outline today, this targets also procrastination, low motivation to exercise, feeling depressed and anxious, all those things, everything has to do with a low baseline dopamine level, which is pretty much what nobody's talking about, right?
Yes.
Usually people and blogs and health experts and influencers, and anytime you research this topic, it's like, how do I increase dopamine? And there's a huge difference between increasing dopamine versus increasing baseline dopamine. So this is what we're going to talk about today. And for those of you who I guess might want to know a little bit about me, so I did my bachelor's and my master's in nutrition and dietetics, and then I became a licensed dietitian. You go through the whole year-long internship in a hospital setting and then you pass the exams, and then after that, after I finished, I started I did my PhD at the University of Miami in exercise physiology and nutrition, and then I taught for decades for the American College of Sports Medicine and the University of Miami and Miami-Dade College, until finally, we were just talking before we recorded that I managed to finally quit all the jobs because I'm fully focused right now on my online content creation, being on YouTube, being on Instagram, and the fitness brand and the nutrition and the fitness stuff that I put out. And it's been really a great thing because this is how people such as yourself, we get to have these amazing collaborations, and you get to know me and I get to know you, and we're spreading the word to
Yes.
so many more people as opposed to teaching a class that's like just 30 people at a time. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my message.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So thank you for kind of giving your background, and I'd love to just kind of step into this topic because I think that many people have problems with starting and stopping and thinking that they're broken, or the opposite, where they're all in and they don't feel like that they can kind of pull back from whatever is this addictive behavior. So can you kind of break down what our brain is doing when we're craving, when we feel like that we're not necessarily able to give up that food kryptonite, that
Mhm.
um, alcoholism, whatever it may
Yes.
be. It,
Yes, and thank you for saying that because it's not just the food that is a problem. It could be alcoholism, it
Mhm.
could be smoking, it could be video game addiction, it could be shopping addiction. I
Shopping,
mean,
yeah.
right? There's so many ways in which a low baseline dopamine level can exhibit its symptoms. So procrastination is another one, low motivation to exercise or low motivation to work on skills that you know are going to push your career further.
Mm.
So all those things, low motivation and all kinds of addictions,
Yeah.
the root cause of those are is a low baseline dopamine. What is a low baseline dopamine level? It basically means not having enough dopamine receptors, specifically D2 receptors. So you don't have enough D2 receptors. Why? Every time you've eaten a cupcake, every time you've engaged in an addictive behavior, every time you go down the path of addiction, you're actually destroying the number of D2 receptors in your brain. And so the reason why most rehab programs fail, like the success rate is what, 1 to 5% only of people who go through really expensive rehab centers and protocols, only 1 to 5% actually achieve sobriety. The reason for that is because they are not targeting the root cause of addiction, which is the destruction of your dopamine receptors or the D2 receptors. There are different receptors for dopamine. There's D1, D2, D3, D4, D5. D1, they all work, but D2 receptors,
Hold
yeah,
on for 2 seconds, Dr. Salazar. Many people may or may not know what a receptor is.
mm,
Can you break down that?
yes,
I know for a cell, for example, it's just kind of that lock and key. You hear about a drug is in your system, and in order for it to come into a cell, it needs that
yes.
matching piece to say, okay, whatever this technology is, or whatever this pharmaceutical, what have you, is that it's okay to come into this cell, for example. Can you talk to us on how that differs in the brain?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a lock and key situation. So when you feel the beneficial effects of dopamine, meaning when you feel great, motivated, happy, all that, all the good stuff that we ascribe to dopamine, it's because dopamine was released from one brain cell and it attached to the receptor on the cell surface of the adjacent brain cell. So it's not just about releasing dopamine. You want the dopamine to be released, and then it needs to attach to this receptor. Receptors are just proteins. They're just proteins that are attached to, let's say this is a cell. On
Hmm.
the surface of it, you have receptors, which are proteins that are attached to it. So the D2 receptor is that protein attached on the cell surface of the adjacent brain cell. So you have dopamine being released, but it has to find the D2 receptor attached to it, unlock it, and now you feel the beneficial effects of dopamine. So
Got it.
if you don't, right? So if you don't have enough of those proteins, if you don't have enough D2 receptors, you might be releasing all the dopamine in the world. But if it can't find those D2 receptors, it's as if you don't have any dopamine. And this is what addiction is. It's like you're still releasing dopamine because you're still using the substance, whatever drug may be, right?
Hmm.
But because you've destroyed those D2 receptors over time, they can't find anything to attach to. And so now you're feeling depressed all the time. Now, I have to, if we want to get just a little more technical here, it's true that as you increase the dose of the drug, whatever drug, cocaine, heroin, food addiction, they all work the same way. As, the reason why addicts start to build tolerance, they start to increase the dose, is because if you release a lot of dopamine, the frequency of activation of the D2 receptors that are still left, even though you have very few left, if you frequently or more frequently activate them, it still gives you a little bit of a boost. It still gives you some dopamine activity.
Okay.
So this is why tolerance develops, because you don't have enough. You've destroyed most of your D2 receptors, but you still have a few, and you've figured out that if you increase the dose of the drug, you start activating them with more frequency. It gives you a little bit of a dopamine effect, right? So over time with addiction, your baseline dopamine starts off good. You're happy, you're motivated, you're energetic, you're in a good mood. But because you're taking drugs, whether it's in the form of cakes or cupcakes or whatever the drug may be, you start destroying the D2 receptors over time. Every time you consume the drug, you have less and less and less D2 receptors. You want to think of D2 receptor numbers in your brain as equivalent to your mood and energy and motivation levels. They're one and the same.
Yeah.
So over time, you start off with a baseline dopamine that's high, a mood that's high, and then over time, as addiction takes hold, you start going down and down and down and down. And so now you're taking the drug no longer to feel high, but you're taking the drug just to bring you back to baseline a little bit, just so you can feel normal, so that you address the withdrawal symptoms, because most of your days are spent in the withdrawal stage of addiction, which is characterized by low motivation, depression, anxiety, all cravings. You see? Yeah. So, so this is kind of like the biochemistry of dopamine and baseline dopamine. Now, most of the content, most of the messaging out there relies on how do you raise dopamine. Like they'll tell you take a bath, go have a walk, or socialize. And that's completely different than raising baseline dopamine, because I can raise dopamine by having a cupcake right now, right? It's not the same thing as doing a targeted brain rehab protocol that addresses the D2 receptor destruction. So this is why I wrote those guides that we're going to give out the people who are watching this.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So the brain rehab protocol that I've developed, there are two main parts of it. There's the exercise component, but then after working with hundreds of clients and realizing that I have clients that need joint replacement surgeries, they cannot work out in the specific way that I want them to. And so I've developed another equally as effective methodology, which relies on visualization techniques. So you can use the visualization, which is a very specific targeted form of meditation, or you can use a very specific type of exercise, both of which can increase over time the number of D2 receptors, thereby targeting the root cause of your cravings, the root cause of your low motivation, depression, all that kind of stuff.
Good, good. Well, and that makes complete sense as it relates to alcohol or food addictions or the others. How do you correlate the same as far as procrastination?
So procrastination or a low motivation to even move or low motivation to exercise, all those things it's the same brain chemistry. It's just not having enough dopamine. Dopamine is also known as the motivation molecule. So when you have enough dopamine, and more importantly, when you have enough D2 receptors for dopamine to activate, you're in a motivated state. And some people, genetically, they're just born with more D2 receptors. Those are people that are very resistant to addictions. They can do drugs and they never get addicted. It
Oh,
doesn't,
wow.
yeah, they just don't get addicted. And that's because they have enough D2 receptors. And so they're very resistant to developing this addictive brain. And
Behavior.
so, and so, and so this is why you will see some people just like they're naturally born, always on the go, always motivated, always, they can't sit still, right?
That's
Type
me.
A personalities, yes, that's fantastic. They tend to be very successful because they just don't struggle with this low dopamine state, this low motivation state. And so this is why procrastination, if you feel like you're generally a procrastinator, check your, maybe it has to do with low dopamine baseline or D2 receptor numbers.
So how can you determine whether or not your baseline dopamine level is low?
Yeah. So you can actually get a brain scan. Of course, it's very expensive. You would have to go to a research center. Usually, universities have those PET imaging, positron emission tomography, or PET scans. So it's not easy. And there's a there's a whole like research heavy way to do that, and it actually shows you exactly how much D2 receptors you have. I don't know if you've ever seen those brain scans. They will show you those PET brain scans of people who have no addiction, people who have overweight or obesity, which in other words, they have food addiction, and people who have alcoholism, cocaine, heroin, and you see the differences in how much D2 receptors they have. You will see that a person who has a normal brain, no addictions, no overweight, no obesity, they have way higher D2 receptors numbers as
Mhm.
compared to people who have addictions. And this is another powerful kind of lobbying point in the nutrition world, where because we really are trying to get sugar addiction, food addiction to be considered officially as a form of a real addiction. And
Yeah,
those brain scans are a very powerful evidence, because you look at the brain scan of somebody who is overweight or obese, and it looks exactly the same as somebody who has a cocaine addiction. It's the same level
interesting.
of destruction in the D2
Yeah.
receptors. The D2 receptors, where they're supposed to be in the brain scan, you don't have enough. They don't light up as much
Mm.
as compared to a healthy person.
Now,
So
is it total damage and then that's it, or are we able to regenerate?
that's a great question. That's always when I used to teach my students, is the first question they would ask me after I explain all this. Is like,
Oh,
okay, so
please.
can we bring him back? Yes, and that's again, that's the whole thing that I do with my guides, with my protocol, with my coaching, with my clients, is the brain rehab protocol. And there are two main components. You have the exercise component, and then you have the visualization component. Now, the exercise can very quickly regenerate the number of D2 receptors. Actually, before I go into those two types,
Yes.
why is it important to do this brain rehab protocol? If you don't do it, you will end up with the same failure levels as all of those $20,000 a month rehab centers, which is like 1 to 5% success rate only, because they're not doing the rehab to increase D2 receptors.
Hmm.
And that's because it takes 2 years for the brain chemistry to go back to normal after you completely abstain from a drug. So imagine whatever kind of addiction you have, if you
Yeah.
just check yourself into a rehab center, or you just decide to stop, you're going to spend 2 years really suffering unnecessarily, because your brain is going to take that much time to go back and regenerate the D2 receptors. And by the way, all the other receptors for serotonin, acetylcholine, and the opioid receptors, it's not just really dopamine. They're all really interconnected, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So imagine living life for 2 years straight, constantly craving, constantly in that craving state, constantly feeling depressed, constantly lethargic and fatigued and unmotivated. So this is why risk of relapse is so high.
Yeah.
We're not treating the root cause, right? And so the whole idea and the whole reason I do this work is because I want to speed up the rate at which you can go back to having a healthy, happy, energetic brain,
Yes.
right? And so, how do you do that? There are two ways. Ideally, if you can do both, that's the fastest route. If you
Hmm.
can only do the visualization because you cannot exercise, that's fine as well. Okay. But let's start with the exercise component. If you are able to exercise, exercise is very powerful because dopamine is an anesthetic, it suppresses pain sensation. And so when you exercise, especially outside of your comfort zone, it's a form of pain, a little bit of pain, right? It doesn't feel comfortable.
Hmm.
And so that sends the signal to the brain that I need more of this anesthetic dopamine so that the next time I work out, it doesn't feel as uncomfortable. And so the brain is not going to waste its energy and resources and efforts to try and increase the number of D2 receptors. It takes work for the brain to change the biochemistry of the brain, the physiology of the brain. Why would the brain waste its time, energy, and effort to do that if you don't give it a strong enough reason? And that strong enough reason or trigger is the exercise, especially the exercise that's outside your comfort zone. So most blogs, most health experts will tell you just, go for a walk or go for a jog. But if it feels easy for you, it's not going to elicit a strong enough increase in D2 receptors, because it's not a strong enough signal for the brain for why you need this anesthetic. It's like, why do you need this anesthetic? It's fine. You're not really hurting. You enjoyed this. You enjoyed this walk. You enjoyed this light jog. It wasn't really that hard for you, right? And so it
Hmm.
has to be outside your comfort zone. And the beautiful thing is that you can decide how much D2 receptors you want. So the faster you run and the heavier weights you lift equals a higher D2 receptor number. So if you, right? So if after a month of increasing your fitness level and starting to be able to run faster and lift heavier weights, you're still you've officially raised your D2 receptors from baseline, right? But if you're still feeling like you're still having cravings, you're still feeling like, yeah, I have an improvement in mood, but not just as much as I would like, then take it another step. Push yourself to be able to run a little bit faster. If you've been running at 4 miles per hour, maybe now it's time to go up to 5 miles per hour speed, right? And you get to decide exactly what is the ideal amount of D2 receptors you want in your brain. And the easiest, cheapest way to figure that out is how fast can you run and how much weights can you lift, because it is equal to how many D2 receptors you have. The faster you can run, the more weights you can lift, the higher your D2 receptor levels or numbers.
And is it all relative?
Yeah.
So, so if I start off lifting 20 pounds or 50 pounds and I increase it or double it or by half,
Yeah.
that's the percentage of increase I'll have in
Yes.
D2.
So if you've been bedbound for a whole year, you had an injury for whatever reason, you've been bedbound for a whole year, and now you go for your first walk ever, it's going to feel as if you're running a marathon. It's really the sensation of discomfort that's the trigger, right? And so that person that went from being bedbound to walking 1 mile, but it felt as if they were running a marathon, they increased their D2 receptor levels significantly from where they were. It is definitely relative, right?
Okay.
And then you can keep getting it higher as much as you want until you feel like the symptoms have gone away, the symptoms of low D2 receptor
Okay.
numbers.
So your results are what indicates the
Exactly. Yes. Short of checking you into a research
right.
facility, putting you into a PET scan, which is very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then does it matter the type of exercise? So like you mentioned going for a walk. What's the difference between either jogging or actually running for an hour versus doing 45 minutes of strength building?
Cardio tends to be more effective just
Ooh.
because time under tension is longer. Whereas when you're weightlifting still works, but I think cardio is faster. Ideally, you want to do a mix of both with a little bit of emphasis more on cardio. So, and that's because when you're lifting weights, there is discomfort, but then you're resting. There's like
Yeah.
a minute or two of rest. So, let's say a full hour of strength training versus a full hour of running. You're more uncomfortable in
Yeah.
terms of time under tension when you're running because you're not taking any rest.
Yeah.
That's all. It's just how much discomfort are you feeling and for how long? The more the discomfort, the higher the D2 receptors. The more time under tension, the more time under discomfort, the higher the D2 receptors.
Okay. That's really good. And then I've heard kind of mixed things as well. You should exercise first thing in the morning before your breakfast to get the maximum amount of results. And then I've also heard the opposite. You should have a 10-minute walk after every meal.
So great questions. The 10-minute walk after every meal helps with insulin resistance because usually when people are having meals, they tend to spike their insulin, and most people tend to be insulin resistant, whereby their blood sugar, it's hard to regulate their blood sugar. It goes up and the body freaks out, pumps out all this insulin to try and bring it down and take up the sugar into the cells. So walking after meals, it's like injecting yourself with insulin without the side effects of insulin. It very quickly normalizes your blood sugar. If you're doing low carb, it's not really that much of an issue. You don't have to freak out and have to walk after every meal. But if you're eating carbohydrates, then it becomes more important to do those walks after every meal so that your blood sugar doesn't rise and remain elevated for an extended period of time and thereby damaging your blood vessels, your cells, all that kind of stuff, right? Accelerating the aging process. That's one thing. Now, waking up and working out first thing in the morning, usually you tend to be in a fat burning stage in the morning, especially if your diet is not very carb heavy. You tend to be running on fats. It's a state called ketosis where your main energy source is fat, right? And so if you're working out first thing in the morning, you're deepening that state and you're just getting more fat burning first thing in the morning. And that can help speed up fat loss for sure. I know for me, I like to wake up and work out first thing because it's just like kind of a guarantee that I got my workout done.
Yeah.
It's easier, you know, as opposed to eating, waiting to digest the food, and then I can go and run. It's just, it makes it harder. And then things come up throughout the day that can take your attention away from prioritizing exercise. So I think there are a lot of good reasons why it's a great idea to wake up and just work out first thing in the morning. Yes, it can definitely make fat loss easier because of deepening the state of ketosis, and it just increases the chances you're gonna make sure that that's a priority. It gets done before you really start getting pulled in a million different directions as the day goes on.
Good, good. Now, how about folks who have fallen off the wagon?
Oh, wow.
What are
Yes.
your tips and techniques there for them getting back on track?
Momentum is so fickle. That's what I always try to tell my coaching clients. I don't think we fully, even I forget sometimes how fickle momentum is. You know, once you fall off track, your motivation, even your baseline dopamine level is affected by that. You know, when you're in a good cycle, when you're getting results and you're doing everything you're supposed to do, you're seeing that you're losing weight, you're psychologically happy because all the goals that you set for yourself, you're on track to achieving them. That raises your baseline dopamine. I don't think we truly understand the science behind momentum. I think it's a very complex,
Mm,
you know, and I think there are so many things that go into it. But I know just by experiencing it and coaching all these clients, I can tell that your baseline is higher. You have more serotonin, you have more dopamine, more D2 receptors, all that kind of stuff. It's just so much easier to do everything you need to do when you already have momentum running for a few days or a few weeks before. So you feel like it's easy for you to stay on track. It doesn't really require as much discipline to say no to the birthday cake because you've been doing great for a whole month straight. You're feeling amazing, and so even if you go out with friends and there's cake, you're like, you know what? No, I'm good. But 1 or 2 days of going off track, we wildly underestimate how much harder it is to
mhm.
get back on track. And I think that's exactly what I was telling my client yesterday. I was telling her, when that happens, in your mind, you have a high bar for your performance. You already know that you can wake up, work out, do everything great. You already know what your peak performance level is at. And the mistake that everybody does is that after they fall off the wagon, the next day they're like, I'm going to go back and match that peak
Right.
level of performance. And they vastly underestimate how hard it's going to be to do that. They're not expecting feeling so unmotivated, and they're like, but I need to be able to do this, but why does it feel so hard? Why do I really not feel like waking up or working out right now and doing all this stuff? And so the separator between people who succeed and getting back on track and most people who don't succeed, the separator is being humble enough to set a goal that is very below your peak performance so that you can guarantee completion of that goal. And the reasoning for that is because the biochemistry in the brain, after you set and accomplish a goal, whether it's the tiniest goal in the world or your peak level of performance, the biochemistry is the same. That release of dopamine kickstarts the positive momentum cycle. It's
Mhm.
exactly the same, you know. And but people don't realize that. They feel like, oh my gosh, like I know what my peak level of performance is. And so to set a goal which is, let's say, just don't eat carbs, but you don't necessarily have to be in a caloric deficit. This seems like such a, like it's such a small goal. Is it even worth pursuing? And so they don't pursue it because they feel like it's not inspiring enough. And so, but what ends up happening, they end up just binging on, you
Right.
know, right? And they're just kind of like deepening this trough that they're digging, and you're just taking too many steps backwards, and now it's even harder to get back on track. And so the trick here is to be humble enough and understand that You are currently wildly underestimating how hard it's going to be. And so be prepared and just set a goal that is impossible to fail at, impossible to fail at, you know? And sometimes it can be as little as just moving your body for 10 minutes. It can be as little as that. Like, I don't care what else you do that day, just move your body for 10 minutes. And most people won't do that because it's like, I'm not going to achieve any results doing that. It's like, no, trust me, that dopamine release that you're going to get,
Yeah.
that's all we need because it's the same biochemistry. All we want is that shift in the biochemistry. And once you do that, then you feel, okay, I've set a goal and I've actually accomplished the goal. I'm more likely now to set a better goal, higher goal, and accomplish that. And that's how you kickstart the positive momentum cycle for the day. And then you get more momentum day after day after day. And that's how you increase kind of like this avalanche of positive momentum that makes your goal accomplishment so much easier. You'll feel everything gets easier to do later on.
I love. That's such a great tip. But what about for those folks who um, have either bipolar or are in that depressive state?
Mm.
Talk to us about the protocol and its applicability there, and the same question around that person being able to get back on track.
That is a great question. So it's really important to be aware of the studies that show how exercise is actually just as powerful as antidepressants, if not more so. And so I think a lot of depression conditions can be traced to inflammation of the brain. The brain is a physical organ, right, that receives blood and nutrients from our body. And so when we understand that if we're depressed, if you have a really serious case of depression or anxiety, it's like you have your arm hurts, right? It's like an injury to a certain body part, and we have to heal it biologically first
Yeah.
before anything else can kind of stick. And so I think this is where a lot of people aren't aware. They think, okay, I'm just going to go do therapy. But, it's like having a broken arm and you're just trying to talk to a broken arm. You have to heal the arm biologically, right? Eat real whole foods, unprocessed real whole foods, exercise, drink water, get enough sleep. Like these are things that are so cliche, but the reason they are cliche is because they're the most powerful and tried and tested and true things.
Hmm.
That's why they're cliche, because they're far more powerful than anything else you can do, right?
Yes.
Also, there's just this study that came out this year that's so exciting. They got it was published this year on 3 cases. All 3 of those cases were severely depressed, anxiety, binge eating disorder, and they put them on a ketogenic diet. So the only thing they did was just eliminate carbs. That's it. Nothing else. No exercise protocol. Nothing else. And they made sure that they got them to a level of ketosis, because there's a measurement device called a ketone blood meter that you can get, and
Yes.
it's like, yeah, kind of like when you check your blood sugar, you just get the ketone test strip as opposed to the glucose test strip, and you plug it into the machine. One drop of blood, and it'll tell you where your ketone levels are at. You need so in this study, all 3 of them, the only goal was to get their ketone blood level to be at 0.8 millimolar per liter.
Hmm.
Okay, just 0.8 or above. And all of them had complete remission. Complete remission. Those are people who could not have a job. They have been on every single antidepressant, anxiety medication, binge eating disorder drugs, like Vyvanse and things like that. Like all the pharmaceuticals, like very serious cases to the point where they could not have a normal life. In just 2 weeks, the anxiety and all of them went away. At the 8-week mark, so in just 2 months, depression went away completely, cured of depression just by doing ketogenic. And They did not even address the binge eating. Like they didn't, this wasn't about weight loss or anything like that. It had to
Right.
do with the mental aspect. The binge eating resolved automatically in all of them. And they went on and they got hired, and now they're fully functional, members of society,
I love that.
right?
Yes. Yeah, and one of the things that you said, I don't think that a lot of people realize is that anxiety and depression are brain inflammation syndromes.
100%. This was such a game changer for me when I read the book by Dr. Mark Hyman. I hope everybody looks him up. I mean, he has truly changed my life, um, because I struggled with all these things, with weight, depression, anxiety, acne, binge eating disorder. I mean, just piling everything on. And once I read one of his books, I read most of his books, but they're all kind of like the gist of it is like one thing, which is um, functional medicine, which is treating the root cause of disease. And
Yeah.
oftentimes it's like there are a few things that we can do, and it starts with exercise and eating the right foods, and that affects every other system in the body. It affects our hormones, it affects our gut microbiome, it affects the level of toxins that we are exposed to. And once you get those systems in place, once you fix your gut health, and you make sure you don't have a toxicity overload because you're eating sushi and you have mercury overload over a period of time, for example, vitamin deficiencies. Once you fix those basic things, it,
Hmm.
so many conditions that you're probably seeing different doctors for every condition. You're probably seeing a doctor for your thyroid, and then you're seeing another doctor for your psoriasis. Once you fix the root cause, all those things usually go away at once because everything is correlated and interrelated to one another,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that changed my life truly, because that's what finally led me to no longer to I mean, I took every single acne drug. I did Accutane twice. I did birth control pills for the acne. I did antibiotics. Nothing worked until I changed my diet. It was the
Mm.
carbs. It's
Hmm.
just the only
Right,
carbs.
right, exactly. And it's same thing here. I mean, another situation as far as inflammation. I was diagnosed as having shingles, which is
Hmm.
inflammation of the nerves.
Hmm.
And because I've been off sugar for so long, it was an aggravation. Whereas many people, when they have the diagnosis of shingles, they are in the bed for several days because the pain level is so high.
Right.
And it's all about reducing. I don't have that inflammatory process that's going on in my body any
There
longer
you
because
go.
I've gotten rid of those um, inflammatory agents, the sugar and the
Yeah.
carbs out of my life. Well, the
Did-
white sugar and the white
Right, the big ones,
no, all sugar, but the white carbs. I still eat
like
vegetables,
flour.
of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you believe me and my hubby have not gotten sick with the flu for me, it's been like maybe 12 years, and for him more longer, because he has been eating this way even before I met him. When I met him, I was trying to like kind of push the things that I was told as a dietitian we should be eating, the food guide pyramid, like the
Mm,
grains, whole food grain, trying to push this on him, and all he ate was just meats,
mm, mhm.
and it's like, and thankfully he listened to me, and he was right. The moment I stopped eating everything I was told that I should be eating, thinking, oh, it's okay, grains is fine, we're told to eat all the grains. That's like
Yes.
the base of the pyramid. And the moment I stopped doing that, I stopped getting the flu, which used to take me out for like 10 days straight. It's
Hmm.
wild, it's simple things like that. But it's, again, we have to always follow the money, right? And a lot of the nutrition research, unfortunately, is funded almost like over 90%, right? Is funded by those nutrition companies, the food industry that relies that and that makes most of its profit by selling you grains that are highly processed, highly addictive. It's very cheap to manufacture, the high profit margin, and it's addictive. And so we're hooked on them. We can't help ourselves. We keep
Yeah.
going back for more. And our dietitians are being taught by the food industry indirectly, because they're kind of just pumping all this money. They figured out that if we just fund the research, usually whoever funds the research is going to get the results that the funder kind of wants to see. Otherwise, that researcher will not be able to get another funding cycle, and that researcher will not be able to have longevity in the research, in their research career. And so, yeah.
It's a vicious cycle. Yeah,
Yes.
it's a vicious cycle. And then you mentioned, so we talked about the exercise component of the
Mm,
protocol. What about the visualization component
yes.
for those who can't
Thank you.
physically?
Yes. That's equally as powerful, if not even more powerful at times. So I created two types of visualizations, and I named them energy visualization and a training visualization. Visualization isn't something new. I just refined the technique, and I kind of made it in a way that is easily digestible and very effective for the specific type of field that I work in. So every single champion, successful person in the world, maybe there's 1% that does not visualize, but almost everybody else is an avid visualizer, from Cristiano Ronaldo to Serena Williams, Venus Williams. I mean, just think of anybody and go and Google, do they visualize? And you will see that they've talked about it and how important it was for them, for their
Mhm.
success story. And that's because visualization is you basically visualizing yourself in that ideal goal having been accomplished. That's energy visualization. So, for example, your goal is to be healthy and fit, let's say. So,
Mhm.
you can do an energy visualization session where you're visualizing yourself having already accomplished that goal.
Yeah.
Just doing that, the brain does not know the difference between a visualized scenario and a real scenario. So it thinks you've already accomplished it, and you can release 65% more dopamine. You increase your dopamine levels by 65% in just one visualization session. How amazing is that? It's like energy on demand. It's like motivation on demand,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Now, also, the training visualization is you visualizing yourself accomplishing something. Let's say, for example, what's the name of the Olympic runner, Bolt?
Hussein Bolt.
Usain Bolt. Yes,
Mhm.
that's what he says. Like, I visualize it, then I go do it. Same thing with Michael Phelps, Olympic swimmer, probably like the most successful. I don't know how many medals he's got. You know, they visualize the races over and over and over and over again in their minds. And when you visualize yourself doing something difficult, you are not constrained in your brain by the limitations of the physical world. And so you can visualize yourself succeeding in doing that hard thing every single time. And the brain doesn't know the difference. So the brain thinks you're actually getting actual reps under your belt. So it actually
Ooh.
yes, they've done so many studies on this. It's chilling. I've put those studies in the Monster Mindset Guide, which again, the people are going to get. So they've done studies whereby they get two groups of people. One group is allowed to practice a piece of music on the piano. Another group is not allowed to touch the piano. They have to practice that piano piece just in their minds. And then they test them, and they both perform equally well.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Another study, um, they get two groups of people. One group will train this muscle. It's just because it's very easy to control this area and it's easy to test. They will basically just train this muscle physically. The
Mhm.
other group is not allowed to move their hands. They have to do the reps, visualize themselves moving this muscle, but they can't actually move it. Same, there's like, I think it was like 35% improvement in muscle strength in the group that only visualized as compared to the group that actually did the work. There were actual muscular changes. The muscle actually got stronger just via the power of the mind, via the power of the visualization, which I call this kind of visualization is a training visualization.
That is powerful.
Right?
So tell me how many times you need to do it, what's the consistency?
Yes. Okay. So just like meditation, over time, the more you do meditation and the more you do visualization,
Hmm.
the higher the number of D2 receptors get. So the longer you do your visualization sessions, the more frequent you do them, the higher the D2 receptor numbers get. We don't have hard data right now
Sure.
where, what we do have is studies that look at meditators, and depending on how much meditation experience they have under their belt, and they can see how the baseline dopamine or the number D2 receptor levels have increased with more and more years of meditation and more experience with meditation. The
Hmm.
quality of, when I say meditation, it's similar to visualization, by the way. What's
Yeah.
the difference, right? Because with meditation, you're focusing on the breath. How does the breath feel like? Is it shallow? Is it deep? How much intervals between every breath? You're basically, the focus needs to remain on the breath, and every time your focus shifts away from the breath, you're supposed to be aware of that and bring it back to the breath. That's meditation.
Hmm.
Visualization, same thing. The only difference is, why waste our focus on the breath when we can focus on the goal that we want to achieve, right? It's more powerful.
Whatever your intention is, yes.
Exactly. And so, the more, with visualization, the more vivid your visualizations can be, and the more senses you can recruit for this visualization. So let's say, for example, you're visualizing winning a race. The more experience you get with visualization, the more powerful your visualizations become, because now you can elicit a stronger, more vivid image, and you can elicit more senses. You can visualize, what does the stadium smell like? What does the wind blowing against me as I'm running feel like? How does my body feel like as I'm crossing through the finish line, winning the race? The more vivid imagery you get,
Wow. Yeah.
the more powerful the effects get, because then the brain believes it even more. And it does
Hmm.
the muscular changes, the nerves, the connections, the physiological changes start to happen more quicker and more effectively. And so those are the things that determine how quickly you can increase the D2 receptors and to what extent. The better you get at it, the more powerful effects you get with raising your D2 receptor numbers or your baseline dopamine levels.
Wow. Well, we can't wait to dive into this. You said monster reset.
Yeah, so the visualizations are within the Monster Mindset Guide.
Monster mindset.
Monster Mindset
Yeah.
Guide. And then the exercise protocol is in the Dopamine Brain Guide.
Beautiful.
Yes, and you'll get both. So you'll have both parts of it.
I love it. Well, this has been an amazing breakdown of our brain and just our ability to um, make sense of not only the fact that we have the power to make these changes, that it doesn't matter whether we feel like we're addicted or not. There are techniques to overcome whatever the addiction. And also ways to realize that anxiety, procrastination, and depression all fall into this same category, and it's all reversible. What a huge gift. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been fantastic. I appreciate you allowing me to share this message. It's a really important message, and I cannot thank you enough for providing this information for your audience.
Well, thank you. No, it's my pleasure to be here because when I went through my process of giving up sugar, I was just given a pamphlet. I was
Mm,
just given a handout and go to the nutritionist who told me to give up sugar, and that was it. Like you said, I've got this A1 type personality and I'm a driven person. I have been in healthcare field for over 20 years. So I saw all the clinical data pointing to diabetes and all of the other metabolic syndrome diseases. And so I knew I didn't want diabetes. I didn't know how. I didn't, and you know what's interesting is that I set that intention 11 years ago. I didn't know it was an intention. I just was a baby and said, I don't want to inject myself with insulin, but I set the intention. I'm not getting diabetes. And then of course, created a process and all of the other things, but it's because that was my goal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of like really the step one in an energy visualization session, right? You set the intention first. What do you want? And
Mhm.
then you visualize it, and then that makes it so much easier to take the actions
Right.
necessary to bring that vision into reality.
Yes.
I love it. I love it.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what Oprah always says, right? The intention. You got to set the intention first.
that's
Took me a
right.
while to really like understand what she was talking about, but it is so true, so
Yeah, it's
powerful.
just the goal. It's just whatever it is you want. If you continue to focus on what you want, not what's going on in our environment, not whatever they're saying, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation because many people do get hung up in the diagnosis. They get hung up in what their body is telling them or how they're feeling, and acting on feelings is not the way to get the goal and get
No,
what it is that you want.
no, no. Yeah,
But
because
it does
yeah,
become easier, like you said, because it rewires.
it changed. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Because if you just rely on feelings, what if you have damaged your D2 receptors? If you have damaged D2 receptors, you're going to be feeling like you want to eat carbohydrates, specifically addictive forms of them, right? You're just naturally gonna your instinct tells you like if I have this cupcake, I'm gonna feel better right now. So you can't just always listen to your feelings. You have to understand what's going on, right? And over time, as your D2 receptors go up and up and up, because you've corrected that, you will not have those same feelings anymore.
Yes.
There's no need to get an external source of dopamine because you naturally have all the dopamine in your brain. You see?
Yes.
Yeah.
And your palate changes as well.
1000%. Yes, that's
Mhm.
very powerful.
Mhm.
Exactly. Because sometimes like you can tell people, okay, have a little bit of chicken, make sure you prioritizing protein. And it's like, but it tastes so awful. It's because yeah, your taste buds have been desensitized, right? And the good thing is that it takes 10 days to have a fresh set of taste buds on your tongue. So after 5 days, you have 50% regenerated taste buds that are kind of like innocent and
Yes.
they like real food. And by the 10-day mark of eating really good, high, unprocessed foods, by the 10-day mark, this unprocessed real whole foods tastes amazing because you have a fresh set of taste buds that don't know what the other drug-like foods taste like.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Well, you guys are going to be getting both the
Dopamine brain and
visualization as well
yes.
as the exercise protocols. And how, Dr. Sarah, can everyone stay in contact with you?
Yes, thank you. So my website, drsarahzaldivar.com. I think, I don't know if my name is going to show on this, but it's
It will.
oh,
Yes.
perfect. All right. Because Sarah with an H. And then Instagram at dr.sarah with an H .zaldivar. And then YouTube, just my name, Dr. Sarah Zaldivar. So it's pretty easy to find me.
Awesome, beautiful. Well, I hope that you guys learned as much as I did and really got the huge nuggets and just the power that our brain has. And that once you set the intention, take the action, that you can actually achieve your goals no matter what you're going through.
Yes, 1000%. Thank you, Kathy. We could talk
Um,
about this for hours,
yes, we can. Yes,
right?
we can. But thank you. It's been a pleasure having you today, and we definitely have to bring you back live as well.
Totally. I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.